Have you stopped to consider that this moment may carry far more meaning than it first appears? Long before you pressed play, before these words reached your eyes, before this quiet exchange between you and this message ever began, something deep within your spirit was already moving. It was subtle enough to dismiss, familiar enough to recognize, and impossible to explain with ordinary logic. Perhaps you convinced yourself it was nothing more than intuition, another fleeting emotion that would disappear with time. Perhaps you labeled it coincidence because that felt easier than accepting the possibility that something greater was unfolding beneath the surface. Yet there is a reason you have remained here until this very instant. You did not simply discover these words. In many ways, they arrived precisely when your inner world was ready to receive them. If there is even the slightest sensation in your chest, that quiet mixture of curiosity, anticipation, uncertainty, and recognition that cannot easily be described, then pay close attention. This conversation is not designed for everyone who happens to come across it. It is meant for those who are prepared to recognize a deeper invitation. If you are listening now, then this Saturday is not another ordinary page on the calendar. It represents a threshold, a moment of examination, a point where your path quietly asks you to reveal who you truly are beneath every role you have learned to perform. Before we continue, understand that your presence here is already part of a much larger alignment. If something inside you has begun to awaken while hearing these words, allow yourself to acknowledge that feeling. And if this message resonates more deeply than you expected, consider subscribing before we move forward. Not because numbers define the value of this channel, but because every new message is created for people who sense these moments of awakening and do not want to miss the next one when it arrives. If you feel called, leave a like and share a few words in the comments as well. Sometimes the smallest act of intention becomes a quiet declaration that you are ready to keep walking this path with greater awareness. Let this be more than another video you happen to watch. Let it become a marker, a reminder that this was the moment you chose to stop drifting through life unconsciously and began paying attention to the signs, the patterns, and the messages that seemed to find you exactly when you needed them most. Take a slow breath, because what follows has the potential to reshape the way you interpret everything that comes afterward. Most people spend their lives believing that every day exists only as another repetition. One sunrise blends into another. Monday becomes Tuesday, Tuesday becomes Wednesday, and the cycle continues until time itself feels empty of purpose. Yet there is one day that carries a quality many overlook entirely. Saturday possesses a rhythm that cannot be measured by clocks or calendars alone. Its influence reaches beyond routine, touching something much older than intellectual reasoning and much heavier than ordinary emotion. Many assume it exists only for rest or recovery, but for those who are truly paying attention, Saturday becomes something entirely different. It becomes a moment of accountability. While the outer world appears to slow down, something invisible begins accelerating within. Hidden realities emerge from beneath the surface. Illusions that once seemed convincing begin losing their strength. Patterns you ignored throughout the week quietly reveal themselves with surprising clarity. You may have experienced this without realizing its significance. Perhaps you noticed an unusual weight settling over your thoughts, or a silence that somehow felt louder than constant activity. Maybe distractions that usually entertained you suddenly lost their appeal, leaving you face to face with thoughts you could no longer avoid. None of these experiences happen without purpose. It is as though the universe gently lowers the volume of everything surrounding you so that, perhaps for the first time in a long while, you can finally hear the voice that has always existed within you. For those walking the path of the chosen, Saturday transforms into a reflection unlike any ordinary mirror. It does not reveal appearances. Instead, it exposes the deeper condition of your spirit. What stands before you is not an image of who you pretend to be, but a revelation of who you have become through every decision, every disappointment, every hidden hope, and every fear you continue carrying. The truth reflected there may challenge everything you believed about yourself, yet you did not arrive at this point through random circumstances. Every heartbreak that left unanswered questions, every delay that tested your patience, every opportunity that disappeared before your eyes, every rejection that tempted you to doubt your own worth, every season when you felt overlooked, misunderstood, or invisible, each experience served a purpose far beyond immediate understanding. None of those moments existed merely to wound you. They were shaping you, They were preparing you for something that your earlier self simply could not have carried responsibly. The future waiting ahead requires a different version of you than the one who first began this journey. That is why Saturday becomes a checkpoint rather than merely another day. It is the place where everything seems to pause long enough for one unavoidable question to rise from within. Are you genuinely prepared for what you have been asking for? Or are you still hiding behind familiar identities that no longer reflect who you are becoming? This is the place where many people quietly fall behind. Their failure rarely comes from weakness. Instead, it begins with distraction. Rather than facing the discomfort that accompanies growth, they search endlessly for something to occupy their attention. They continue scrolling through endless noise. They bury difficult emotions beneath constant stimulation. They avoid the silence because silence asks questions that entertainment never will. Yet, your decision was different. You remained. You continued listening. That single choice says more about your current path than you may realize. It suggests that somewhere within you exists the willingness to face whatever this moment reveals. You are not here because you hope to avoid the examination. You are here because some part of your spirit already knows you were meant to move through it successfully. The earliest indication of this transformation rarely arrives dramatically. Instead, it enters quietly enough that many overlook it completely. You begin stepping back from environments that once felt comfortable. Not because sadness has taken hold of you, and not because you have become weaker, but because your inner landscape has started changing. Conversations that once filled entire evenings suddenly seem strangely hollow. Places that once energized you begin leaving you emotionally exhausted. Even relationships that once felt deeply meaningful may seem increasingly difficult to connect with in the same way. This shift often creates confusion because the familiar no longer provides the comfort it once did. You may wonder whether something has gone wrong, whether you are becoming distant from everyone around you. In reality, something far more significant is taking place. This is not abandonment, it is alignment. Your energy is no longer being scattered in every direction. Instead, unnecessary distractions begin falling away so your focus can gather into something far more powerful. A divided spirit cannot fully navigate a sacred test. Clarity requires concentration. Purpose requires intention. If you notice yourself becoming quieter, speaking less, observing more carefully, and protecting your energy instead of constantly giving it away, do not mistake that process for disconnection. You are not separating yourself from life. You are strengthening your connection to what is real. Eventually another phase begins, one that is perhaps even more difficult to explain. A period of waiting settles over you. Logic struggles to describe it because it cannot be measured physically. Yet its presence becomes unmistakable. It rests within your chest like an unanswered question. It follows your thoughts from morning until night. It accompanies you through ordinary routines while quietly reminding you that something significant is approaching. You awaken with its presence already there, and you carry it throughout every hour of the day. Although you continue moving through daily life, that silent awareness never completely disappears, as though your soul already recognizes that an important turning point is drawing closer, even before your conscious mind fully understands why. The moment this invisible pressure begins to settle over you is often the exact moment people make the greatest mistake. They assume something inside them has gone wrong. They convince themselves they are emotionally exhausted, spiritually disconnected, or somehow losing their ability to keep moving forward. Yet what feels uncomfortable is not evidence of failure. It is evidence that a deeper level of awareness is attempting to reach the surface. Before genuine understanding arrives, there is almost always a period where everything familiar begins to feel unstable. It resembles the atmosphere before a storm breaks across the sky. The air grows heavier. The silence becomes impossible to ignore. Your inner world starts shifting long before your outer circumstances reveal why. This is not happening because life has turned against you. It is happening because truth is beginning to replace illusion. Whenever false beliefs begin collapsing, the human mind instinctively resists. It searches desperately for certainty, even if that certainty belongs to an outdated version of reality. We naturally cling to what feels familiar, even when the familiar no longer supports who we are becoming. That resistance can make transformation feel frightening, but the weight you carry during this season is not designed to break you. It exists to reshape you. Saturday intensifies this experience because it refuses to let hidden truths remain buried beneath distraction. Instead, it gently but persistently directs your attention inward until you can no longer avoid what has been waiting to be acknowledged. If you continue paying attention, another unmistakable pattern gradually begins revealing itself. Suddenly, life appears filled with repetition that feels almost impossible to dismiss. These are not meaningless coincidences scattered across your days. They arrive with remarkable precision, as though an invisible intelligence keeps presenting the same lesson through different circumstances. Conversations seem strangely familiar, even when they involve entirely different people. Emotional wounds that you believed had already healed unexpectedly return wearing new faces. Situations unfold with such similarity that it almost feels as though your life has become trapped inside the same unfinished chapter. At first, this repetition can create frustration. You may wonder why nothing ever changes, why every attempt to move forward somehow circles back to the same emotional crossroads. Yet, what appears to be an endless cycle is actually an invitation. Life is not punishing you by repeating the experience. It is patiently presenting the lesson until your response evolves. Saturday has a remarkable way of bringing these repeating themes into perfect focus. It is almost as though the universe quietly places each familiar scene directly before you and asks you to observe it with fresh eyes. This time the question is not how much discomfort you can tolerate. The question is whether you are finally willing to recognize what has always been standing in front of you. Will your reaction remain identical to every previous attempt, or will you notice the deeper message that has patiently returned again and again because it refuses to leave until it has been understood? Then everything changes with astonishing speed. What seemed confusing only moments before suddenly becomes unmistakably clear. The realization does not arrive piece by piece. It appears all at once, dissolving years of misunderstanding within a single instant of recognition. You begin seeing that your greatest struggles were never ultimately controlled by other people. They were never completely determined by circumstances, timing, or luck. The deeper story has always centered on your own decisions, your willingness to establish healthy boundaries, the direction of your energy, and your courage to embrace reality rather than remaining attached to comforting illusions. This discovery carries extraordinary power, but it also demands something uncomfortable. It removes the comforting belief that you are merely a victim of events beyond your influence. In its place comes responsibility, a responsibility that can no longer be ignored once awareness has arrived. This is the true turning point. The examination becomes real because your eyes are finally open. Once genuine awareness enters your life, there is no path back toward unconsciousness. You cannot honestly pretend you failed to notice what has now become obvious. The truth stands before you, asking for action instead of excuses. As this awakening continues, another unmistakable sign begins emerging, one that many people underestimate until it becomes impossible to silence. Your inner voice grows stronger, not louder through confusion or emotional chaos, but steadier through unmistakable clarity. It begins reminding you of truths you have quietly carried for far longer than you admitted. It points gently toward decisions you have delayed making. It shines light upon realities you repeatedly looked away from because facing them required change. This guidance does not overwhelm you with force. Instead, it returns patiently, speaking with remarkable consistency until you either honor its message or deliberately push it aside. What you hear during these moments is not fear pretending to be wisdom. It is not uncertainty disguised as intuition. It is authentic guidance rising from the deepest part of yourself. Saturday magnifies that guidance until ignoring it becomes increasingly difficult. This forms the final stage of the examination. The question placed before you is beautifully simple, yet profoundly challenging. Will you finally trust the wisdom already living within you, or will you abandon yourself once again in favor of temporary comfort? Eventually, a remarkable stillness begins surrounding everything. It is unlike ordinary quiet. It feels almost as though the entire world has stepped backward, leaving you alone with your own spirit. The distractions that once entertained you lose their influence. Constant noise no longer satisfies the deeper longing inside your heart. Activities that previously filled empty moments suddenly seem strangely hollow. This silence does not arrive accidentally, nor does it exist merely to soothe you. It exists to reveal you to yourself. Within silence, there is nowhere left to hide behind external opinions, endless movement, or familiar routines. Every excuse loses its power because the only voice remaining is the one you have spent so much time avoiding. This is where the examination reaches its deepest level. Most people instinctively run from this experience. They immediately search for another distraction, another habit, another source of stimulation capable of drowning out the uncomfortable honesty beginning to rise within them. Yet, you are being invited to make a different choice. Remain present. Stay with the silence instead of escaping it. Allow yourself to experience every emotion without immediately searching for relief. Hidden within that stillness is a message that cannot reach you through noise. The more patiently you listen, the more you discover that silence has never truly been empty. It has been communicating with you from the very beginning. As the quiet deepens, another challenge naturally appears. The desire to escape grows stronger. Restlessness begins moving through your body. Your thoughts become increasingly eager to find something, anything, capable of interrupting the experience. Old habits suddenly appear more appealing than usual. Familiar distractions call your attention with unexpected intensity. None of this means you are failing. It simply reveals that resistance has awakened. The part of you still attached to the past recognizes that transformation is becoming unavoidable, and it attempts one final effort to pull you back toward familiar comfort. It invites you to return to old behaviors, familiar emotional patterns, and previous versions of yourself that never demanded meaningful change. Yet the path beyond this moment requires something rare. It requires complete presence. Presence asks you to remain with every feeling instead of running from it. Because of that, the temptation to escape becomes part of the examination itself. Will you surrender to those familiar impulses, or will you recognize them as the final barrier standing between your past and your future? The instant you refuse to abandon yourself, something extraordinary shifts. You recover a power that had quietly been waiting beneath every layer of fear and hesitation. In that single decision, everything begins changing from the inside outward. Although no physical boundary appears before your eyes, you can unmistakably sense its existence. There is a threshold standing before you separating the person you have spent years being from the person you are now prepared to become. And every choice you make from this moment forward determines which side of that invisible line will define the rest of your journey. There comes a point in every true awakening where an invisible boundary appears before you. It cannot be touched with your hands or measured with your eyes, yet you recognize its presence with absolute certainty. It is the dividing space between living through automatic reactions and living through conscious awareness. It separates the comfort of remaining the same from the uncertainty that accompanies genuine transformation. Saturday has a unique way of bringing you directly to that unseen threshold, but it never forces your next step. It simply waits with extraordinary patience, allowing the decision to belong entirely to you. That is why this moment feels so significant. No outside force can make the choice on your behalf. The universe can reveal the doorway, but only you can decide whether you are willing to walk through it. This is the place where hesitation quietly begins. Not because you lack strength, but because moving forward always requires releasing something that once gave you a sense of security. It may be an old belief you have carried for years, a familiar emotional habit, a relationship that no longer reflects who you are becoming, or an identity that once protected you during an earlier chapter of your life. Even when those things have stopped supporting your growth, part of you still mourns the thought of leaving them behind. The heart often mistakes familiarity for safety, even when familiarity has become the very thing preventing expansion. Yet this invisible line exists for a far greater purpose than creating fear. It is not designed to hold you captive. It exists to reveal whether you are truly prepared to embrace the next version of yourself. The instant you decide to move beyond it, regardless of whether certainty accompanies you, regardless of whether the path still feels unfamiliar, something profound begins unfolding beneath the surface. A process is activated that cannot simply be reversed. Once genuine awareness has been chosen over comfortable illusion, there is no returning to the person who could remain asleep. The crossing itself changes you in ways that continue unfolding long after the moment has passed. Shortly afterward, you begin noticing subtle differences that are difficult to explain with ordinary language. Before your mind fully understands what has happened, your spirit recognizes that something has shifted. The heaviness that once seemed almost impossible to carry does not vanish overnight, yet it no longer feels like an unbearable burden. Instead, it gradually transforms into clarity. What once created confusion now begins creating direction. Thoughts that previously competed against one another slowly settle into harmony. Decisions become less clouded by emotional noise. The uncertainty that once surrounded every step begins dissolving, as if a hidden fog has finally started lifting. This is not an accident, unfolding without meaning. It is the natural result of alignment taking root within your life. The moment you choose awareness instead of automatic reaction, everything surrounding your energy begins responding differently. Your inner world reorganizes itself. New possibilities quietly emerge because your consciousness is no longer operating from the same place it once did. The change may appear almost invisible to the outside world, yet its influence reaches every corner of your experience. What matters most is not immediate external transformation. The greatest shift happens within you first. When your inner foundation changes, everything built upon it gradually begins changing as well. As this alignment deepens, another experience often follows, one that can initially feel confusing. People who once seemed to understand you effortlessly may suddenly struggle to relate to you. Conversations lose the natural rhythm they once carried. Interactions begin feeling strangely unfamiliar, even with individuals who have remained part of your life for years. Responses from others may surprise you, because they no longer reflect the expectations you previously held. None of this indicates that something has gone wrong. It simply reflects the reality that your inner frequency has begun changing. Growth naturally alters the way you connect with the world around you. At first, this can feel lonely. There may be a powerful desire to explain yourself, to convince others to understand what you are experiencing, or to invite everyone around you to see what has become increasingly obvious within your own awareness. Yet not every journey is meant to be translated into words. Some paths are meant to be lived rather than explained. Every individual moves through transformation according to a different rhythm, and not everyone has reached the same stage of awakening. Because of that, you cannot reduce your own awareness simply to preserve the comfort of old relationships. You cannot silence what has awakened within you merely because others have not yet recognized the same truth. The path opening before you requires authenticity, even if authenticity occasionally asks you to stand by yourself for a season. Solitude during growth is not evidence of abandonment. Often it is evidence that your foundation is being rebuilt before new connections are prepared to enter your life. Even after this inner shift begins establishing itself, another challenge quietly appears. Doubt returns with remarkable subtlety. It rarely announces itself dramatically. Instead, it whispers familiar questions that sound almost reasonable. Perhaps you have misunderstood everything. Perhaps you are reading too deeply into ordinary events. Perhaps returning to your previous way of thinking would simply be easier. This stage deserves careful attention because it represents the final attempt made by your former identity to regain influence. The voice sounds familiar precisely because it has accompanied you for so many years. That familiarity gives it temporary credibility. Yet beneath those questions lies one final examination. Will you trust the awareness that has already revealed itself to you, or will you abandon it simply because uncertainty feels uncomfortable? In moments like these, remaining grounded becomes essential. Do not allow temporary fear to become more convincing than genuine experience. Remember what you have already recognized. Remember what your own heart revealed before doubt attempted to rewrite the story. Uncertainty is not always warning you to stop. Sometimes it is measuring your willingness to continue despite the absence of complete certainty. If you remain steady instead of retreating, if you refuse to surrender the progress you have already made, something remarkable begins solidifying within you. The transformation no longer feels temporary. It becomes part of your identity. You prove not to the world, but to yourself, that you are capable of honoring your own awakening even when no one else fully understands it. After that, an entirely different kind of confidence begins settling quietly into your spirit. It is not loud or dramatic. It does not seek attention or applause. Instead, it arrives as a calm certainty that no longer depends upon external confirmation. You gradually recognize that your circumstances no longer possess the power to define your inner state. You realize that recurring patterns are no longer invisible because you have learned to recognize them before they control your choices. You discover that feeling uncertain never meant you were lost. It simply meant you were waking up. This realization changes far more than your emotions. It transforms the position from which you approach life itself. Instead of waiting passively for events to improve, you begin participating consciously in your own evolution. You stop expecting change to arrive from somewhere outside yourself because you understand that meaningful transformation begins with the awareness you choose to embody each day. This is where authentic power first reveals itself. It is not expressed through domination, force, or the need to control anyone around you. Its foundation is clarity. It is the quiet strength that allows you to see situations honestly, make intentional decisions, and continue moving forward without depending upon constant approval from others. This level of awareness was always the destination hidden within the examination you have been experiencing. Every challenge, every repeated lesson, every uncomfortable moment has been guiding you toward this deeper relationship with yourself. By the time you arrive here, something important has already happened, whether you have fully acknowledged it or not. The examination that once seemed distant has already begun transforming into evidence of your progress. What previously felt unbearably heavy now carries unmistakable purpose. What once appeared confusing gradually reveals itself as part of a meaningful design. This is what alignment feels like when it begins unfolding from within instead of being imagined from afar. At this stage, another doorway quietly opens before you. It is not a physical gateway that appears in the external world. It is a profound shift in perception, a completely new way of interpreting both yourself and your life. The world itself has not suddenly changed. Rather, the eyes through which you view it have changed. Because of that, possibilities that once remained invisible begin revealing themselves naturally. Opportunities no longer appear exactly as they once did because you are no longer seeing them through the consciousness of the person you used to be. As this new chapter begins unfolding, you may notice something remarkable. Choices that once felt impossible to make suddenly become easier to understand. Paths that seemed hidden beneath endless uncertainty begin revealing themselves one step at a time. What previously looked like confusion slowly organizes itself into direction. Yet do not mistake this clarity for the final destination. It is only the first glimpse of what is possible. The journey waiting ahead asks for an even greater level of self-awareness, a deeper commitment to inner alignment, and a stronger willingness to trust the wisdom growing inside you. The important difference now is that you have developed the capacity to meet what comes next. You are no longer standing where you once stood. Even if you cannot yet see the entire road ahead, something within you already recognizes that you are prepared to continue walking it. Many people imagine that once an awakening begins, every difficulty immediately disappears. They expect life to become peaceful overnight, every decision to feel effortless, and every question to receive an immediate answer. Real transformation rarely unfolds that way. Instead, there is often a season that feels suspended between two identities. You are no longer fully connected to the person you used to be, yet you have not completely settled into the person you are becoming. Living within this space can feel unfamiliar because both the past and the future seem equally distant. Old behaviors begin losing their influence, while new ways of living are still taking shape. Previous definitions of who you believed yourself to be quietly dissolve. Yet your emerging identity has not fully established its foundation. During this period, it is completely natural to question your progress once again. Those questions do not appear because you are moving backward. They arise because your awareness has expanded beyond the limits that once contained it. Growth often feels uncertain while it is happening. The mind searches for familiar ground, but transformation requires learning how to stand where certainty has not yet arrived. This transitional season is not evidence that something has gone wrong. It is an essential part of alignment itself. Before you can fully inhabit the next level of your journey, every remaining attachment to the previous one must gradually be released. That release does not occur through a single dramatic moment. It unfolds patiently through one realization after another, one layer after another, until everything that no longer belongs naturally falls away and nothing unnecessary remains to slow your movement forward. As this process continues, detachment becomes less of a choice and more of a natural consequence. Things that once occupied an important place in your life begin drifting away without conflict or force. It almost feels as though they can no longer remain within the same space you now occupy. At first, this experience may resemble loss because your heart remembers the comfort those people, habits, or beliefs once provided. Relationships may quietly evolve into something different. Priorities that once dominated your attention may suddenly lose their importance. Even your understanding of yourself may feel unfamiliar as old labels stop describing who you have become. Yet this is not loss in the deepest sense of the word. It is refinement. Life is not removing these things as punishment or rejection. Instead, the universe is creating harmony between your inner evolution and the reality surrounding you. Anything that no longer supports your current direction naturally begins stepping aside. Although part of you may still want to preserve the past exactly as it was, another part already understands that true progress requires empty hands. You cannot continue carrying what belongs to an earlier version of your life while expecting to fully embrace what is waiting ahead. Every release creates room for something that has not yet arrived, and every space that feels temporarily empty is quietly preparing itself for a future that better reflects who you are becoming. Eventually, the examination changes its focus. External events no longer become the primary challenge. Instead, your attention shifts inward. The greatest questions now arise from your own emotional landscape rather than from circumstances surrounding you. Feelings may surface unexpectedly. Memories you believe were finished may quietly return without invitation. Experiences you assumed had already been healed can suddenly reappear with surprising emotional intensity. It is tempting to interpret this as moving backward, but that interpretation misses what is truly happening. This is not regression, it is integration. The parts of yourself that once remained unnoticed, ignored, or carefully hidden are finally asking to be welcomed into your awareness. They are not appearing to overwhelm you. They are asking to be understood with the compassion and clarity you have gradually developed. Here the examination presents itself once more. When these emotions arise, will you immediately react as you once did? Or will you remain present long enough to observe them without allowing them to take control? Genuine transformation never asks you to eliminate your emotions. Instead, it teaches you to understand them without surrendering your awareness. Every feeling becomes information rather than identity. Every emotional wave becomes an opportunity to deepen your understanding rather than a force that determines your actions. The more consistently you remain conscious while experiencing your emotions, the more firmly your new way of being becomes established within you. Even during moments that appear lonely on the surface, another experience quietly begins developing beneath your awareness. A subtle feeling of support emerges, one that is difficult to describe yet impossible to ignore once it is recognized. Nothing dramatic announces its arrival. Instead, it reveals itself through quiet moments of unexpected harmony. Circumstances begin aligning in ways that require less struggle than before. Small moments of clarity appear exactly when they are needed. Situations resolve themselves with a surprising sense of ease. These experiences are not random accidents without meaning. They naturally arise when your inner direction begins matching the path that was always waiting for you. The resistance that once seemed to block every step gradually weakens. In its place comes a quiet current that gently carries you forward. You may not always understand why events unfold the way they do, yet something inside you begins trusting the movement itself. You recognize that you are no longer carrying every burden by yourself. There is an unmistakable feeling that your journey is unfolding alongside something greater rather than in opposition to it. The more willingly you trust that quiet guidance, the more consistently it reveals itself. As your awareness continues expanding, your relationship with time begins changing in unexpected ways. Individual moments gain greater meaning. Decisions are no longer made carelessly, but with thoughtful intention. The constant pressure to hurry through life slowly begins losing its influence. Instead of racing toward the future, you become increasingly present with each experience as it unfolds. Gradually, you begin recognizing connections that once escaped your attention. Events that previously seemed unrelated now reveal themselves as parts of a much larger pattern. Circumstances that once appeared completely random begin displaying remarkable precision. Delays that once frustrated you now make sense because you can finally see how perfectly they fit within the larger sequence of your journey. This new perception transforms the way you move through everyday life. Instead of reacting impulsively to every situation or constantly chasing outcomes that remain outside your control, you become someone who observes carefully before choosing intentionally. Patience replaces urgency. Presence replaces anxiety. Awareness replaces automatic reaction. Rather than forcing life to unfold according to your expectations, you begin cooperating with its deeper rhythm, trusting that each experience arrives exactly where it belongs, within the greater story that has been unfolding all along. And this growing understanding quietly prepares you for the next stage of the path that is only beginning to reveal itself. And this awareness creates a sense of calm, not because everything is easy, but because everything is understood in a new way. Just when you begin to feel stable in this new awareness, one final wave of resistance may rise. It may come in the form of doubt, fear, or unexpected challenges that seem to test everything you have learned. And this moment can feel intense because it appears just as you thought you had moved past the hardest part. But this is not a setback. It is a confirmation. The closer you get to a breakthrough, the stronger the resistance becomes. Not to stop you, but to strengthen you. Because the version of you that is about to emerge must be stable, must be grounded, must be able to hold the awareness you have gained without collapsing back into old patterns. So this final resistance is not here to break you. It is here to solidify you. And if you move through it with the same awareness you have been building, you will find that it does not stop you. It transforms you. Then, without warning, everything begins to make sense. The patterns, the emotions, the challenges, the silence, the weight, all of it connects in a way that feels undeniable. It is not a sudden external change, but an internal clarity that shifts everything at once. You see your journey not as a series of random events, but as a structured path that has been guiding you all along. And this realization brings a sense of peace that is deeper than anything you have felt before. Not because everything is perfect, but because everything is understood. You are no longer searching for meaning. You are seeing it. You are no longer questioning your path. You are recognizing it. And this clarity becomes the foundation for everything that comes next. At the end of this phase, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. You were never lost, not in the moments of confusion, not in the times of pain, not even when you felt completely disconnected from yourself. Every step, every experience, every realization was leading you here to this exact moment of awareness. And while it may not have felt clear at the time, it was always unfolding with precision. This realization does not erase what you have been through, but it transforms how you see it. It gives it meaning. It gives it purpose. And most importantly, it gives you clarity. Because now you understand that you are not navigating your life blindly. You are moving through a process that is shaping you into exactly who you are meant to become. And this understanding changes everything because it allows you to move forward not with uncertainty, but with trust.